Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into the life of one of history's most, well, complicated figures. Alexander III, who we all know as Alexander the Great.
And he's so much more than just a conqueror.
Exactly. He wasn't just a military genius. He was the person who basically forced two worlds, Europe and Asia, to collide. And in doing so, he kicked off the entire Hellenistic age.
The scale of what he did is almost hard to imagine today. He was born in 356 BCE. By 323 BCE, he's dead.
32 years old.
Just 32.
Yeah.
And in that time, he creates an empire stretching from Greece all the way across the Persian Empire down into Egypt. The speed of it all is it's really unparalleled.
It's staggering, a gigantic state built in about a decade of nonstop war. But the mission for us today isn't just to list his battles.
No.
We really want to dig into the central contradiction of his life. Here's this guy, a student of Aristotle, who has to grapple with this core Greek idea of the barbarian.
And he ultimately tries to reject it, doesn't he?
He does. He tries to build this unified sort of hybrid empire. And that tension, that's what we're exploring.
Yeah, that tension runs through everything. His politics, his command structure. You can feel him trying to reconcile the prejudices of his own generals with his grander vision. It was a fight he was still in right when he died.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. His origins. Alexander's parents were Philip II of Macedon and Olympias.
An Epirot princess, and a very intense one at that.
And the sources make a huge deal about his legendary family tree, tracing it all the way back to Achilles.
And that's not just, biographical fluff.
Yeah.
It's completely central to how he saw himself. He carried this sense of heroic destiny with him his entire life. It's what fueled that ambition.
But we have to talk about Macedon itself.
We do. It's crucial context.
So what was Macedon's status before Philip? I think we tend to see it as a Greek power, but it really wasn't, was it?
No, not in the eyes of, say, Athens or Sparta. For centuries, Macedon was this pretty weak kingdom on the periphery.
A backwater.
Exactly. Constantly fending off Thracians and Illyrians. And here's the key thing. Even though they spoke a dialect of Greek, the southern Greeks saw them as, uncivilized barbarians.
So his father, Philip, is the one who basically fixes that barbarian problem by just making Macedon too powerful to ignore.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Philip was a genius. He modernized the whole state, organized its resources, and created that almost unbeatable professional army Alexander inherited.
The Macedonian phalanx.
Right. Philip built the foundation. Alexander just gave it a purpose.
So he had the army, and he also had the education. We hear about him taming the horse Bucephalus, his skill with weapons, his obsession with Homer's Iliad.
But the real intellectual force was Aristotle.
And that's where the conflict we're talking about really starts.
It is. For years, Alexander was his personal student, and Aristotle's advice was, let's say, very clear.
What did he tell him? How should he rule the people he was going to conquer?
Well, Aristotle's whole philosophy was based on the Greek city-state, the polis. So his advice to Alexander was pretty cold. He said, when you deal with Greeks, rule them as a leader.
Okay.
But when you deal with outsiders, the barbaroi, rule them as a master. He literally argued that non-Greeks were natural slaves, designed by nature to be ruled.
That is an incredibly rigid worldview, and that advice must have been the first psychological barrier he had to break through once he decided to actually rule Asia, not just conquer it.
Exactly. When you look at his later actions, adopting Persian dress, marrying a Persian noblewoman, you see him actively, deliberately breaking from his mentor's teaching.
So after Philip's death in 336 BCE, Alexander secures his throne. He's only 20 years old.
And he has to move fast. He crushes a few revolts, most famously at Thebes, and very quickly establishes this reputation for being both brilliant and totally ruthless.
And then he crosses into Asia.
The second he crosses the Hellespont in 334 BCE, the clash with the massive Persian Empire becomes inevitable.
So this whole campaign, it really boils down to what, 3 major battles against Darius III?
The 3 decisive victories, yes.
Yeah.
The first big one is the Battle of Granicus in 334. That victory basically shatters the Persian coastal defenses and gives him solid foothold in Asia Minor.
And the second?
The Battle of Aetius, a year later in 333. And this wasn't just a military win. He captures Darius's family, his mother, his wife, his daughters.
Forcing Darius to flee the field.
Right, and strategically, Aetius opens up the entire path south to Egypt.
But he doesn't just chase after Darius, does he? He consolidates.
He does. He's very methodical. He besieges the city of Tyre for 7 months to crush the Persian naval power. Then he moves on to Egypt.
And taking Egypt was huge, both strategically and for his image.
Oh, absolutely. He has himself crowned pharaoh, which was a brilliant move to win over the Egyptian people, and of course he founds the city of Alexandria.
Which already hints at this long-term vision of integration, right? A permanent Greek cultural base. But the real game changer, the battle that truly broke the Achaemenid Empire, that was Gaugamela.
Gaugamela, in 331 BCE. This was it, the final overwhelming victory. Darius threw everything he had at him, war chariots, huge numbers of infantry. But Alexander's tactics were just on another level.
And after that, the great Persian capitals, Babylon, Susa, they just surrendered.
They opened their gates. The conquest was, for all intents and purposes, complete.
And then he gets to Persepolis, symbolic heart of Persia, and he makes two moves that seem completely contradictory. First, the revenge.
Yes. He seizes the treasury, which had centuries of accumulated gold, and then, in a very symbolic act, he burns the grand palace of the Persian kings.
As payback for the Persian sack of Athens.
Exactly. It signaled that the Greek War of Vengeance was officially over.
But if the burning was the end, why did he immediately pivot to a policy of integration? I mean, he starts recruiting the sons of the very people he'd just conquered.
It was an incredibly risky move, and it's where you see him fully break from Aristotle. He realized he hadn't just conquered an army. He'd conquered a vast, complex, sophisticated empire.
You can't rule that with just 50,000 Macedonians.
You can't. So he shifts from conqueror to emperor. He starts training 30,000 Persian youths in the Macedonian style to create a new royal army, loyal only to him, an army that blended east and west.
This shift is so dramatic, and to really get how radical it was, we need to dig a little deeper into that word we keep using, barbaros.
We do.
Ooh.
The meaning changed over time. In Homer's day, it was onomatopoeia, someone whose language sounded like barbar, just gibberish. It was a neutral term.
So when did it become negative? When did it pick up this political weight?
During the Greco-Persian Wars in the 5th century BCE, historians like Herodotus started framing the conflict as this huge ideological battle.
West versus East.
Exactly. The free, democratic Greeks versus the enslaved, despotic Persians. By the time you get to someone like Aristotle, the word means someone who is fundamentally inferior, a natural slave. It justified conquest.
So Alexander had to shatter that prejudice within his own ranks if he wanted this hybrid empire to have any chance. What were his most direct policies to make that happen?
Well, he started adopting Persian customs himself. He wore elements of Persian royal clothing, which horrified his Macedonian generals. They saw it as a betrayal.
But the biggest move, most explicit statement, was the wedding at Susa.
That event is just legendary. It was a massive, carefully choreographed political festival in 324 BCE.
A reconciliation ceremony?
It was. 9,000 Macedonians, including Alexander himself, were married to Asian women in one giant ceremony. The whole point was to literally create a unified Greco-Persian ruling class for the next generation.
But it didn't really stick, did it? We know that after he died, most of those Macedonian men divorced their wives almost immediately.
That's the tragic reality. It shows you just how deep that Greek prejudice ran, even after a decade under his rule.
But there was one exception.
One major exception, yes. Seleucus I, who kept his Persian wife Apama as his queen, and the fact that it was Seleucus, the man who would go on to found the giant Seleucid Empire, that tells you he, at least, had truly absorbed Alexander's vision.
And even with that political failure, the cultural fusion he started, that changed everything. That's the start of the Hellenistic Age.
Absolutely. His campaigns were never just military. They were research expeditions. Greek culture spread everywhere. Koine Greek, the common dialect, became the universal language of trade and government from the Aegean to the Indus Valley.
Which was revolutionary.
It meant a Greek merchant could feel at home everywhere.
And what about the science? You said the expeditions were also scientific?
They were. He brought geographers, botanists, historians with him. They mapped unknown lands, collected specimens. His fleet commander, Near Chase, charted the entire coastline of the Persian Gulf. It was this huge influx of new knowledge that completely expanded the world's understanding of itself.
Fascinating. So this incredible wave of expansion finally hits a wall. And not because of a military defeat, but because of sheer human exhaustion in India.
That's right. He pushed deep into what was then a Persian satrapy in India. He fought this incredibly difficult battle at the Hydaspes River against King Porus and his war elephants.
And then, in typical Alexander fashion, he befriends Porus afterwards.
Makes him an ally, yes. But his army was done. They had been on the march for nearly 10 years. They were just spent.
Alexander wanted to push on, right? To the Ganges.
He did. He thought the Ganges was the edge of the world. But at the Hyphasis River, His men, his veterans, they just refused to go any further. They had heard rumors of armies with 5,000 war elephants waiting for them.
They vetoed world conquest.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's maybe the most human moment in his whole story. He was furious, locked himself in his tent for days, but in the end, he had to give in.
And that forced him to turn back towards Babylon.
A brutal march back through the Gadrosian Desert. And as he's heading into this final phase of his life, you can see the absolute power starting to change him.
The despotism.
Absolutely. Right before he died, he sent a message to the Greek cities demanding that they grant him divine honors.
Which, to a Greek, was just the ultimate act of tyranny.
It was. And the famous reply from the Athenian orator Demosthenes just captures the mood perfectly.
What did he say?
He said very cynically, "Let Alexander be the son of Zeus and Poseidon too, if he wishes." It just shows you how tired the old Greek world was of his drift towards this deified absolute monarchy.
But that path was cut short. He gets to Babylon, and it all ends.
He does. He dies suddenly in 323 BCE. He's only 32. It was some kind of feverish illness that lasted about 2 weeks.
Do we know what it was?
It's one of history's great mysteries. Malaria, typhoid, poison. We really don't know for sure.
And that unified Greco-Persian world he'd been trying to build,
Hmm.
it just evaporated.
The dream died with him. His empire immediately shattered among his top generals, the Diadochi, the successors. Ptolemy took Egypt, founding the dynasty that ends with Cleopatra. Seleucus took the vast Asian territories.
So we're left with this legacy, an undefeated military genius, but also a visionary politician who tried something almost impossible, the fusion of East and West.
And his real legacy wasn't the empire, which fell apart so quickly. It was the cultural world he created, the Hellenistic age, this period of centuries of exchange, all fueled by a common language and culture.
That hybrid culture outlived the empire itself.
It did. And that brings us to, I think, a really interesting final thought for you to consider. Almost everything we know about Alexander, this heroic military mastermind, it comes to us through later chroniclers like Arrian and Plutarch.
Who were writing for a Greek and Roman audience. They were writing the Western narrative.
Exactly. And they were often very apologetic. They focused on the battles, the glory, the strategy. They justified his actions.
And in doing so, they maybe simplified the story.
Yeah, you have to wonder. Did their focus on military achievement ultimately overshadow Alexander's own, more complicated vision of a merged East-West world? Did the storytellers end up burying the very cultural project he died trying to build? It makes you question how much of history is shaped not by the events, but by who gets to tell the story.
A powerful question to end on. We hope you feel a little more informed on the incredible complexities behind Alexander the Great. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.